Let's go ahead and make a video on everything that can go wrong with the shifter. Now here's the bottom of your shifter housing, and it has a snap ring and a rubber, should be a rubber base. Now that rubber base should be one piece there, because when you put lubrication in the top of the ball socket, there you can see the ball socket, when you put lubrication in there, preferably not WD-40, but maybe some white grease, that bottom rubber piece, here we go, that bottom rubber piece should hold the lithium. So that rubber piece is shot, and see the snap ring. So we're just going to say, we'll get to that later. Now here's usually the worst part of the shifter is here. This bushing has to do one thing, has to move forward and backwards. It cannot move sideways. So when you're underneath the car and you got your flashlight out and you want to know why you lost fifth gear and you can't get it in reverse, you take your hand and you wiggle this back and forth. And if there's any movement, then this bushing is bad. The other thing is, so we've got a ball socket here. Now, how do you know if your ball socket's bad? Well, you can take your shifter rod, and while this is bolted down, and I'm going to use my foot if I can get my foot here. So you take your rod, and while it's in the car, you pull up and down on this. You pull up and down on it, okay? Now you're going to have a little bit of movement back and forth. But if you pull it up and it moves up that far, then you got a bad ball and a bad housing. Lastly, we're going to look at this adjustment. Actually, this is preset at the factory. Now remember, when your fork is attached underneath the car, and this fork has to have your plastic pieces in here, and the reason is that it has to slide back and forth, so it goes this way and it tilts back and forth. So it goes forward and backwards and tilts back and forth. All these pieces have to be relatively tight on that shifter assembly. Now let's go back to this bushing here. So we know that's a bad bushing. We know that's really bad. If you take this band off, you're going to have a heck of a time trying to find your gears again. Now I've taken the band off once, and I pulled this shaft out, because all it is a shaft, and you tighten this down to keep it in place. But this rod is adjustable. What happened to me is I had a good bushing, and I took the band off and I didn't mark it, and I should have marked it with what's called a Dremel to put a cut in here, and it has to be exact. And the reason is I spent 4 hours in an afternoon one time getting this back in position where I had both fifth gear and reverse on the opposite side. So fifth gear goes this way, reverse goes this way. I recommend anybody that pulls out a shifter, the first time you ever do it, okay, the first time you ever pull out a shifter, take it out from the inside of the car, because if you take this off and then fix your bushing here and put it back together and you're not dead on to the factory setting, it's going to take you another 4 hours to find fifth gear and reverse again. Same thing. So another thing guys don't understand is they say, well, everything looks tight. Baloney. It has to be tight, and the reason is, look at your throw. You've got probably less than an inch on each side where it's going to hit the assembly. A half an inch on each side. So you have to have this bushing at the bottom tight, and you have to have your assembly at the front relatively tight where there's no air gap, because you just don't have enough room to throw this shifter where you need it to go. You just don't have enough room. That's why everybody says, well, I lost fifth gear and I'm losing reverse. Well, the first culprit is always this bottom bushing. Again, if you see any movement back and forth with this thing, The bushing is bad.